There we go. And before I begin, I just want to say that the views expressed in this speech are my own and not on behalf of the EPA. I appreciate this opportunity to speak on what I view to be the most pressing issue of our day, climate change, here in Vatican City ahead of the 2018 Synod of Bishops on Young People, the Faith, and Vocational Discernment. I was raised on the shores of New Jersey in the United States where I committed to protecting our planet while attending an environmental science high school. I saw the effects of climate change firsthand when, in 2012, Hurricane Sandy devastated my local community, flooding our barrier islands and displacing thousands. Today, I work on environmental justice and community engagement at the Environmental Protection Agency on a team that protects human health and the environment from hazardous waste. Global Goal 3, Target 9.2. As someone raised in a Franciscan Catholic family, I believe we have been blessed by Pope Francis in the direction in which he is leading our church. Brothers and sisters, it is the greatest honor of my life to be joined with you today. For the next 13 years to 2030 and beyond, we will be sailing an arc in solidarity as we work to protect our common home, to build the future we want, and to shepherd in a new age of sustainable development. These are the faces we will turn to as we strive to accomplish the Sustainable Development Goals. Once again, humanity is calling on her youth to bear the shared weight of the world, fight the battles of past generations, and preserve the dreams of tomorrow. We are here to accept this responsibility. Before we sail into 2030, we must understand how we got here. Over 250 years ago, in the hopes of building a better world for their families and future generations, our forefathers launched a global revolution. From their revolution were born new technologies that advanced standards of living and extended life expectancy. From their revolution were born new countries, like my own, centered on radical new definitions of individual freedom and equality. Their industrial revolution brought about existential changes not only in the course of their lives, but also in the lives of future generations. Today we walk in the shadow of their history, the history of a people who, in a scientific sense, knew not what they did. Beneath the invisible clouds of greenhouse gases that once held their dreams are the visible inequities that the pursuit of those dreams left behind. Plagued by colonialism, racism, and greed, the promise of the Industrial Revolution was never fully realized. Today, we are facing the pains of climate change firsthand. For my home country alone, sea level rise is redrawing the geographic boundaries of our Gulf states, wildfires rage throughout the West, and hurricanes have taken the homes and power away from my Puerto Rican brothers and sisters who were already bereft of the political and economic power needed to have a seat at the table. These are the marks of a planet crying out for a renewed balance. Yet in 2015, humanity answered the call. 193 countries of the United Nations came together to launch the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, complete with a set of 17 goals, global goals, aimed at nothing short of saving the world from its greatest challenges. In December of that year, the world came together to gavel in the Paris Climate Agreement, setting an ambitious goal to cap global warming by 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100, a step toward realizing Goal 13. I'm proud to have played even a small part in the making of history in Paris while working at the United Nations Foundation. Never had I been filled with more hope. I knew that, once again, older generations in power were planting their seeds of hope in us, the youth, to build a better world that they would never get to see. As we consider the opportunities born out of these new hopes, values, and technologies present today, we must check our own sustainable revolution against an uncompromising test. How do we meet the needs of the present without compromising the future generations' abilities to meet their own needs? When faced with such a daunting question, it is often best to begin looking for answers through our own faith. Here I turn to the book of Genesis, wherein God calls upon Noah to build an ark to house 2 of every species on earth, while he purges it from sin with the floods. Noah dutifully builds an ark to protect the biodiversity of a planet threatened by extreme weather. Today I call upon each of us to take up the same mantle of leadership and responsibility to become the ark-building generation, to protect our common home. Our sustainable revolution must be inclusive. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis calls upon us to enter into a dialogue with all about our common home. It is our responsibility to bring that conversation home. As ark builders and global goals advocates, we must recognize that we all have a role and responsibility to act on climate. We must reach out to everyone, beyond those who agree with us, on how we should set our sails to 2030. Remember, it took the United Nations several attempts to produce the climate agreement. Jesus, a carpenter, brought together a tax collector and a businessman, fisherman and tradesman, a revolutionary and a prostitute, all through his message of love. By coming to the same table to discuss our shared goals, we will become a more fraternal society. We must become disciples for all global goals, teaching that in our respective fights for freedom and equality, we are not only acting as patriots, but also compatriots in a cosmopolitan struggle for human dignity. We must engage our brothers and sisters on the front lines of environmental justice issues so no one is left behind. Our sustainable revolution must be accessible. Too often do global gatherings take place in a vacuum where those without the means or status are unable to contribute. As Ark Builders and Global Goals advocates, we must remember that it was the poor widow whom Jesus says contributed most to the temple offering by contributing all that she had. Let us continue to bring the offertory basket of ideas to our brothers and sisters without the means or knowledge of how to participate themselves. I'm proud that this important conversation is digitally recorded so that we may share the best practices we learn here with our communities at home. We must speak plainly to communicate the global goals to broad audiences, allowing anyone to plug into the conversation. Indeed, there are millions of people around the world who are doing the work of the global goals without the United Nations lingo. We must integrate their work into our global movement. We must educate our companies and workplaces on the value of the global goals and integrate those goals into their corporate social responsibility practices. And we must engage our leaders in our daily lives on the moral responsibilities embedded in these goals, particularly as they have the power to impact the environment and the most vulnerable of us. And finally, our sustainable revolution must be championed. The tools and technologies exist to help us build and sail this ark, but we still need to steer it to success during its long journey. As Ark Builders and Global Goals advocates, we must use our platforms to shout the successes of our sustainable revolution from the rooftops and the airwaves, with Pope Francis' leadership as a shining example. We live in an attention economy, and the more time we spend sharing the hopes and promise of the global goals, the greater our ripples of positive change will be. Tangibly, this means writing articles in our newspapers, making television appearances, fostering partnerships for the goals, becoming active on social media, advocating to our political officials, and otherwise bringing the conversation to every local, national, and international audience possible. The United Nations set an ambitious target: teach 2 billion people about the global goals and train 700,000 people to become advocates for them. I find the work of Dr. Jeffrey Sachs' Sustainable Development Goals Academy, a team I now volunteer for, to be particularly fascinating, as it brings together the world's top academics and to co-teach courses on the global goals. But I encourage us to be even more ambitious if we are to meet the UN's targets. How many new people would learn about the global goals if Pope Francis, a former teacher himself, co-taught a multilingual course on saving the world with the heads of UN agencies, religious and non-governmental organizations, and recognizable and admirable leaders on a platform such as Netflix, CBS, or the BBC? How many people could we engage if we, as SDSN youth, gave these watchers the tools to activate on these issues with these communities? I have a proposal with me today that discusses exactly this. Inclusion, accessibility, attention. This is how we build a tangible, sustainable revolution. This is how we steer the ship to 2030. We must look on each other for inspiration as role models and pass the microphone to amplify the news of our good works. We must understand that we do not have the years of Noah, but we still we may never see a world in perfect harmony with nature, but we must put faith in the future of that time to continue. So let us sail on and arc against the current into providence, into the world we want, into a sustainable future. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and I look forward